Welcome to our Grazing Club webinar with Melissa Workema from Future Analytics Lab in Red Deer, Alberta. So good morning, Melissa. My name is Michael Thiele. My task here, my task is to coordinate Grazing Club events, and typically we'll do winter workshops and maybe the odd winter field day as well, but given our situation, we're doing everything virtual and it's worked out quite well. Last week we had Melissa on talking about plant sap analysis, and that was great, and we had a really good attendance for that, and it looks like we have another good attendance this week. Grazing Club events are funded by Ducks Unlimited, and Ducks has been solid supporters of the Grazing Club initiative now for over 20 years, understanding the links between our stewardship of the land and the health of our ecosystems for people and wildlife, things like wildlife habitat. Give me a sec here. I am just going to.
Hey, Ralph. I think Brad Dennis.
There we go. And I'll unmute. So like I said, last Friday we had Melissa discussing plant sap. Yep, I can hear you, Melissa. I have everyone else muted. So this week, Melissa is going to discuss her unique approach to soil testing. Please post questions in the chat, and we may pause partway through when there's sort of a natural break and answer some questions. Otherwise, we'll answer questions in order. After Melissa's presentation, we can do a nice question and answer and have a discussion. If there are too many questions and we can't get through them all on the webinar, I'll forward them to Melissa, and we'll get answers to you on whatever questions you have. And you're also welcome to phone Melissa or email Melissa and overwhelm her with phone calls and emails.
And if I don't answer the phone, it's because I'm on the line with somebody else.
Yeah,
I'm not ignoring
and she also
you.
does have to get some work done in the lab itself. So yeah, today Melissa will discuss her work at Future Analytics Lab in Red Deer and soil testing. So great to have you back, Melissa, and we can begin your presentation.
Off we go.
Yep.
Well, hopefully this week ties in a lot of questions from last week that you had with SAP, and just tying in with the soil and what I'm doing. So the first slide, oh. Just give me a sec, why is it?
I think you got it.
Okay,
Yep.
so can everybody see that?
Yep.
So the approach for the extracting and the differences again from industry, I'll use all weak acids rather than strong acids, which is equivalent also the difference between SAP and tissue testing. For industry labs, they'll use strong acids such as nitric, hydrochloric, and sulfuric acid to extract a different variety of weaker acids. The water extraction is going to reveal a carbon number and the nitrogen levels, which we'll get into. The difference between the weak acids and strong acids, which we'll also get into. In simple forms, it basically says it's either available or non-available. In chemistry terms, it's reduced to oxidized form. That's what labs will explain it as. Currently, I just started taking measurements for humic and fulvic acid levels, and that again came from Israel, and the buffering reagents, which is very important, which isn't, I find, mostly discussed, but it's very important when as a final step for soil testing. So here are the big difference between tissue tests and the SAP tests. SAP is mostly the reduced form. That's why people love it so much. And when you do a reduced soil extraction, that's when you're using the weak acids. So then for the tissue, it's the total form of nutrients, which is equivalent as the oxidized soil extraction and when you're using the strong acids. So just made a note, looking into the reduced form of chemistry will always present more nutrients based on what's currently available. When you use an oxidized form, that's when you switch from that being currently available to the plant, like sap, to the total amount. So the number differences from my reports to conventional labs are very different, and that's the sole reason, is because I'm maintaining that reduced form in all of my chemistry rather than doing the oxidized form. So then, which weak acids to use? This can get very overwhelming if you don't know exactly what's in there. There's a list I made. I could go on and on and on, but the following lists I have is citric, malic, oxalic, uric, acetic, formic, maleic, succinic, butyric, and valeric acids. All of those you're going to find in the root exudates of what a plant is going to release. That changes from the soil type, what crop you're growing, where you're growing it, and basically the soil type to what ratios are going to show up in the root exudates. So I'll run a scan and see what's in there originally for the soil, and whatever shows up for that weak acid, then I'll make a solution based on those weak acids that are in there. So that's literally just mimicking what's in your soil, keeping it in the reduced form, and obviously the final step of buffering. But if I use those weak acids, to me it makes sense that whatever you're using as a weak acid, then that's exactly the nutrients that the root and the plant will be seeing when it starts to grow. And that's, again, where SAP ties in. I had a hard time pasting a bunch of pictures for a bunch of the weak acids, so I drew it out. Basically what I'm trying to tell you here, the weak acids, why they're so good to extract the nutrients out of the soil, is they all have between 1 to 3 carboxylic groups. The minute you exceed over 3 carboxylic groups, it becomes harder to become soluble in water. If you were to draw out humic and fulvic acid structures, they would probably take up the entire page. It's just a huge molecule. So humic is very insoluble in water. But with the weaker acids, they all tend to have between 1 and 3 carboxylic groups, making them water soluble. So it makes it nice and easy to make a solution based out of any one of these weak acids to extract nutrients. There's a ranking order for all of the weaker acids and their biological processes. The strongest you're going to find is the citric and malic acids. Medium biological processes, your maleic and fumaric, and the weakest is oxalic and acetic acids. Good thing with oxalic, even though it's one of the weakest listed here, it's the best to release nutrients in your calcareous soils. And maleic acid is one of the best. It recruits the beneficial bacteria, and it also helps with the nitrogen metabolism, which is huge when you get into the second phase of the nitrogen, which we'll get into. But the more maleic acid you have, obviously the better breakdown of nitrogen and the movement of the bacteria. Carbon, which is included in with the report, in simple terms, it can be considered the food for the microbes, and the organic matter is basically the house Carbon has to be broken down into two types: living carbon, and that includes your alive microbes, algae, fungi, protozoa. It's also lignin. There's quite a few in with living carbon. Then your non-living carbon is then broken down further into organic and inorganic carbon, which we'll get into. So both the living and the non-living carbon. It's important to note that on my reports, the total carbon number is going to include both the non-living and the living carbon. So then the non-living carbon, it's broken down into two further categories. Your organic carbon is mostly your sugars. Then your inorganic carbon is going to be the crushed limestone. I put the mineralization of dead microbes and the humification of organic polymers, but that's what you're going to want in the inorganic carbon section. The humification brings on the humus, and it's the breakdown and decay that mineralization process that's key. And I find a lot of people focus more on the living carbon, which is on the top, which is good, because you want the microbes, you want the algae, you want the fungi and everything on top. But the more production of the mineralization process you have from the non-living carbon, which is down below, the more organic carbon eventually in the end you're going to have. So that mineralization section in the non-living carbon is very important, and that's where even your weaker acids come in, like the maleic acids. They're all going to help with that whole process. There's an example of my report, so just to have an idea, if you see my report, you'll see the organic carbon number come in at the very top through the water extraction. So taking, let's say, that 320 of a carbon number, if you take 10% of that value, that's going to be in carbon, and the remaining 90% is going to be the non-living carbon that's part of that. So if you have a good number, from the target number, 320 is a very good number. Actually, that one came from Manitoba, so well done. That 90%, that's where you're really going to want that mineralization to come in, and you're going to have more humus come in. So with a good number at 320, you have a good number to break down that non-living carbon. But if you're already low at, let's say, below 100, you take 10% off of that 100, and that's even less for the soil to work with on that remaining non-living part. So the more carbon you have, the better, basically. Microbial respiration, this is a simple test. It just measures the carbon dioxide released from the microbial activity. This will eventually lead to the greater non-carbon LFA analysis, which I eventually, with more income and more along, I do plan on doing that. I do think there's a lot more work to be done with that test, but that will definitely contribute to understanding on the inorganic carbon side. Nitrogen, again, there's two forms that must be considered through the water extraction. There's your inorganic nitrogen, which includes your nitrates and ammonium, which everybody tends to go to nitrate, which is your inorganic form. And your organic form is all of your amino acids, proteins, lignin. Again, it's all the healthy sources of nitrogen. So these two are also separated on my reports. There's an example. So there's, again, your carbon number. And the two nitrogen numbers come in. This is really neat. If you see nitrate and ammonium levels low, so these two, the 0.15 and 0.14, I like seeing that. I much rather see a lower nitrate and ammonium, and then you'll see the organic nitrogen come up higher here. So right away, for a healthy soil, microbial respiration, carbon numbers are also a good number to look at. This total nitrogen number If this nitrogen number is within range, let's say even if it was a 25, but most of the nitrogen was coming from your nitrate or ammonium sources, I don't like that. But this report showed a total nitrogen number within range, but your organic nitrogen is higher than your inorganic nitrogen. So that's telling me that most of the nitrogen coming from here is coming from the organic source, from your proteins, amino acids, and a good source of nitrogen rather than just having high inputs of nitrate in the soil. So this top section is critical. I know we can get into the root exudate at the bottom, but this top part is going to tell you overall how healthy your soil is going to be in the end. Oh, there's a second example. We can see the opposite. I hope you guys can see the target ranges on the side because I can't. But if you see the target ranges on the side, here's a perfect example. Microbial respiration is way down. Carbon number is significantly less. And it just seemed like there's a lot of tie up in the top here because even your organic and your inorganic nitrogen was low. But then through the root exudate, after running the scan of seeing the weak acids in there, the root exudate nitrate came out very high. And that just proved that the most source of the nitrogen in this crop was through the nitrate. So you've literally got barely any biologicals, your carbon number is low, and the input of nitrate came through. So this high nitrate number on the bottom, that's what the root systems are first going to see when you plant that crop, and with barely any biologicals. And again, no molybdenum, literally none in the soil, which is obviously a lack of your good nitrogen source again. So it's just basically an example of a good report and a bad report. So this is the report you want. This is just a chart showing a certain pH. I'm sure you guys have seen it, and how nutrients come through at a certain pH, and just how it correlates to my report. So here at a pH of 5.6, we see copper, zinc, boron, manganese, and iron come through higher, which correlates to this chart right in here. So my pH at the 5.6. Tying in with sap, and here you can see the carbon number was okay, but if we just look through the calcium, all of the nutrients in here from the soil test at 779 were okay with calcium. As reflected from the sap report, calcium was pretty good, and that was towards the end of the season. Magnesium came out pretty good from a little on the high side. Magnesium on the sap report came out a little on the high side as well. Potassium came out low, was low on the sap. Sodium was a little high, so if you just go through all down here, the only one that came out a little different, and I think that's just due to, well, molybdenum was really low, which came out negative also in the sap. But copper came through on the sap. But what a plant will do for the micronutrients, if there's no micronutrients in the soil for the plant to use, the exudates will actually release that copper to the plant. So I believe that's what happened here. It's just the roots released that copper, but there's literally none in the soil. Humic and fulvic acids, it's very important. I know all you guys want humic and fulvic. There's been quite a few tests done. It was part of the library I did at the Weizmann Institute of Science. It's very important, the both of them, due to both humic and fulvic will form a strong complex by wrapping around one another, making that entire molecule more readily available, so the nutrients will become more available. And it's that binding process that holds it better as it's an organic molecule. It holds the nutrients stronger than an inorganic molecule would. It's very important. Humic acid becomes absolutely ineffective at a pH of 5 or less. So please check the pH of your products before you apply. If it's at even a 5.5 or less, that humic acid, you'll see a little jump in your crop, but overall it's going to barely do anything. It's best to have a humic product at a pH of 6 or higher, and then we can go from there, but you have to be very careful where you're going to buy your humic products from. Fulvic acid is much more soluble over a pH range, so it's okay to get a fulvic acid at a pH of 4. Let's say it's not going to have, or it'll still have the same impact. Because humic and fulvic are such complex molecules, when I analyze the instruments I have, there's several different ways you can analyze, but with humic and fulvic, because it's such a complex molecule, it has to be plotted on a graph of absorbance versus wavelength. And at a certain nanometer, you're going to see a higher peak develop, and we're always after an absorbance of 6. And that's just the work that was done at the Weizmann in Israel. So if on my reports, you'll see a number, if I give you a number of a 1 or a 2, just keep that scale from a 0 to 6. And if that comes up as a 1 or a 2, you've got some, but you could definitely use more. Buffering as the last, it's critical. I find not too many labs tell you how they're buffering, and if they do, it's mostly with calcium and potassium. So you'll see much higher numbers on their reports for calcium and potassium than you will on mine, because I don't buffer with that. Barium is my new best friend. I buffer with barium, and it literally matches the pH exactly to what the soil is at. So after I use the weak acids, from what I've seen in your soil, I'll buffer it to what's already pre-existing in the soil. Really neat. I consistently start seeing a strontium show up. I've seen it in about 3 soil reports so far where strontium shows up, and I'm going to start playing around with buffering with strontium. And the neat thing with that is strontium is a certain isotope. It will pick up previous things that were pre-existing in the soil. So if that reveals even more information, that's even more for us to learn from. But right now, barium is my best friend, and it literally brings that pH to where that soil initially is at. So when I run that root exudate, it's just telling me that's exactly whatever number I'm going to get. It makes perfect sense to me that that's the nutrients that are going to be available to the plant. And then to conclude, it's just very important for me to treat every farmer on an individual basis and not categorize anybody, because every farmer is different. Every crop is going to hold a different quality, which has to be treated differently from each farmer. That's all. Questions, I guess.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. That was great. Yeah, we have a bunch of questions. First one, this is actually a question from myself. A number of producers here in Manitoba and Saskatchewan are using the Haney test. So how would you compare what you're doing to the Haney test?
Haney does fantastic work. Haney will use, from what I understand, I haven't talked to him, so I don't know the exact details. But from what I understand, he'll use a combination of citric, oxalic, and malic. So the top three weak acids, which he's absolutely correct in using. Where I differ is by running that scan to see exactly what's in there and making a solution custom to that solution, because you may just have maleic acid, you might just have the tartaric or succinic, and I think it's important to know exactly what's in there first. And then again, I haven't talked to him, but from what I understand, he uses lithium citrate to buffer the lithium. There's nothing wrong with that. But the citrate to me would add the extra citric acid. So more nutrients could come through. I don't know again. But so him and I differ on, I'll vary the weak acids and I buffer it differently. I buffer mine with mostly barium. And like I said, I'm going to start playing around. If I start seeing strontium show up more in soil, I'm going to start buffering with strontium. So we're somewhat on the same page, but there's a few differences there.
Right. Like the way I'm thinking about it is what you're doing is sort of like a custom Haney test where you're simply building a custom extract based on what you're seeing in the soil prior to doing the analysis. Well, that's very interesting.
But I think most labs have a standard solution.
Right.
Like some labs will use the Albrecht or the Bray, and that's just a standard solution. It's not custom to what is in the soil already. Again, I don't know if Haney is doing a custom of like the citric, oxalic, and malic acids.
I don't believe so. I know that
as a custom solution.
No.
Yeah, there's the.
I think what he has done is.
I don't know if he is or not. So.
I think over time, what he's done is, I think he's on version 4 of the extractant that he's using, just tweaking it a little bit to make it more, just work better. You mentioned PLFA.
Yeah.
What would be your comments about, because that's been around for a while and it's sort of a good crude test for soil biology, bacteria and fungi. But what would you say
I think the PLFA just needs to be broken down into what function is going to contribute to the nitrogen, or like a citric acid or a maleic acid. It really needs to be broken down more. And so you guys know exactly what that non-living section is actually going to contribute to, rather than just listing what's in there, which is good. I think it needs to be broken down into more so you guys know exactly what is doing and what it's going to contribute to.
Right. So what do you see are the
Not yet though. Give me time.
Yeah. No, I'm just
can't do everything all at once.
Oh, we understand. But what do you think is the potential then for maybe the next step to do genomic testing for soil biology?
I think that'd be eventually in the end, for sure. Yeah. Again, with more time.
What's the turnaround time on your soil test?
Soil, depending on how much I get. If I get a lot, you have to give me a week, because it's quite a bit of work to run that first scan, to make the solution, and then with all of the biologicals in there, it takes me a bit. With just a few samples, I can generally get it done in 3 to 4 days, but with a lot of samples, give me at least a week.
Okay, well, that's very quick.
So it's a bit longer than SAP, but there's a lot more information in there.
Right. How deep would you recommend the samples are taken?
Most I get now is at 0 to 6 and 6 to 24. But generally, I think you're safe just with a 0 to 6 or 0 to 12.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
About 3 to 4 cups, Ziploc bag or paper bag, whatever you have.
If you take the sample and you can't get it to the courier right away, do you recommend freezing it?
No.
Just put it in a fridge,
Never
keep it
freeze
cool?
it. Just put it in the fridge, or just, depending on how long you let it sit, if it's over 2 to 3 days, then maybe put it in the fridge. But if it's only sitting out for a day or two, that's fine.
Okay. Just not in like on the dash of your truck with the hot sun beating down on it. Okay.
Yeah.
What would be your target EC, and would that change during the growing season?
I generally see about a 0.3 to a 0.6, and I'd need to see more results, the higher or lower ECs and what it's going to do, because I just started this last fall. So I'd say between like a 0.5, 0.7 right now, but I haven't seen anything higher than that. So like I said, I don't know. Obviously with the greenhouses and greenhouse soils, I see a lot higher, but that's a different environment.
Right. Can you explain EC just quickly for the group?
EC is the electrical conductivity, or the total salts in the soil.
Right. So for us out here on the prairies, that basically means salinity.
Yeah. So I would think anything higher than a 1, you're getting high.
Do the different acid types present in the soil that you mentioned change by crop type, growing season, moisture, or historic management, conventional versus say zero?
Crop type, yeah. Crop type, absolutely, it changes.
Okay.
On the ratios that occur for sure. Moisture, I'm not too sure. Again, I need to see more to see that. Biological activity, definitely. You're going to see more and more. The higher the ratio of the weaker acids I'm going to start to see is going to tell me that it's becoming a healthier soil. Right now, the ratios are very low, but the higher the ratios get, the healthier you're going to start to see everything.
Okay, next is from Paul. He says, let's discuss timing of soil sampling. Any possibility of your analysis working on samples taken prior to planting instead of waiting for soils to be, say, warm up a bit, say 50 degrees Fahrenheit?
Like, is it okay to sample now, or?
Yeah, what would be your recommendations for timing sampling, like anytime?
Oh, I'm getting them constantly, so I think most sample in the fall and the spring,
Right.
but if you can sample now, I don't see any harm in that.
Because, for example, I think Haney is recommending that soil temperatures be roughly, I think that 50 degrees or 10 Celsius, something like that, to have a little bit of biological activity occurring. So I don't know, especially for things like soil respiration.
And they could be really, yeah, I haven't seen impacts of that yet. Maybe if I start to see more soil next summer, I'll start to see, but I only started this in the fall, and it's carried me through the winter. But by next summer, if I see a lot of different numbers, then I'll let you guys know. But at this point, I don't see anything critical.
Right, that's good to know. Next, this is from Edgar. He's asking, what lab credentials or proficiency testing approach do you work with?
I'm through the process now of, I won't go through industry accreditation. I think there's too much bureaucracy with it. But there's an independent accreditor that I've discussed getting accredited through right from Calgary.
Okay, excellent. This is our last question, so if there's any more questions, please get them into the chat. Is the presence of those different acids, one of the reasons / benefits of diverse crop rotations and diversity of cover crops, maybe even intercropping?
Yeah, definitely. With the cover crops and the intercropping, each plant is going to give off a different variety of the weaker acids, and usually you're going to start to see more of each of them. And I suspect you're going to start to see more of the maleic acid come through on the cover crop, which is going to help with your overall nitrogen and the recruiting of that bacteria. And then there again, it would depend on which type of cover crop. I haven't done any soil testing for you guys yet for the cover crop, so I would need to see for sure, but I'm suspecting I'm going to see higher levels.
My sense is that what you would start to see is maybe more balance within the diversity of different root exudates because of the diversity of
hopefully.
Plants. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah.
We can aim for it.
Yeah, and I think if we can start to show that's an interesting correlation that is worth documenting.
Yeah.
Larry asks, what does a soil test cost?
$65.
$65, okay. Do you have a name for it, for the test itself, or it's just soil test?
No, you guys can help me with that one.
Well, you should call it the Workama test, kind of like Haney.
No.
Well,
what kicked me forward was the Israelis, so it has to do something with Israel. I have to give something back to them.
Okay, so that's where
you guys can help me with that, maybe.
That's where the concept.
You guys can think about it over the weekend and email me with some name suggestions, though.
So the test that the test that you're conducting is based on work from Israel?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was given the reference library that was built up, and that's what kicked me forwards. It like I said, it was about 3 years of work that went into that. So I can remember some things, but obviously like things with Humic and Fulvic and how you measure that and the absorbances and everything was, I had to see what we did again to fully understand and to incorporate it. But I absolutely stand by that and the work that was done for sure. I have no question.
So you may be the only one conducting this soil test in Canada, but it's being used in other parts of the world.
Yeah, because research is very important too. Like the research where you're actually seeing things and then applying it in the field is critical. And the more knowledge we have, the more we understand.
Yep, completely agree. Do you want the total soil collection or just a portion of it? Do you want the total soil collection or just a portion of it? I'm not sure I understand that.
I'm going to say down. Total.
Yeah, I would say total. If what Paul's asking is through the profile, yeah. Like there are different ways to collect a soil sample, right? You can do a sample where you just take a sample from a single point, or you can sample from a number of locations and build a composite sample, and then from that send in a sample, right?
Yeah, like if he's thinking, let's say if in the summer you see one part of the field, and you do that in SAP testing too. If you see one part in the field that's not doing that great, whether it's a disease or a nutrient deficiency or something, even for SAP testing, it's always nice to separate those two. If one area isn't doing that great, sample the area that doesn't look that good, and then sample the area that looks generally or better. And then you can even compare the SAP test to see what's going on different and the difference is occurring there. And by all means, if you wanted to sample and you know one area in your field always doesn't do that great compares to another area, you can definitely sample each area just to see what's going on from one section to the next.
Okay, that's good advice. Dried down or wet? The sample.
I'll just collect it, I'm not picky.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, probably best not to collect it when it's like after a 3-inch rain or
Just
something.
don't put it in a jar of water and then you're okay.
Yeah,
Just collect it, put it in a bag and send, you're okay.
okay. How many samples should be collected to make a composite sample? So now what we're really talking about here is, we're talking about prairie agriculture, large farms. There's no way to do grid sampling at the cost and the scale. So, we're looking at, say you had a quarter section field, right? How many samples would you send in to get kind of a sense of it? How would you put that? How many acres should a composite sample be taken from? Those kinds of questions.
Oh gosh. I can ask Hal. Hal sends quite a bit. I don't know how they sample because those are quite large fields. I really don't know.
We do like on a quarter section, we would do 12.
There you go.
Yeah.
Hey,
So 12 per quarter section.
can I jump in on this? This is Paul Overby.
Yep.
There's some research that was done at Montana State several years ago showing the correlation between the number of cores in a composite relative to its repeatability or its confidence level. Since we're all familiar with political polling now, you could equate it to that. How confident is it to repeat? And 20 is kind of a magical number. Obviously, the more cores, the more likely to be able to replicate that over and over again. And I've kind of set as a minimum 15, although we zone manage all of our fields, and I take no less than 12 cores from a zone, even if it's only 6 acres, because of that ability to replicate. And then we're also taking from exactly or relatively the same geographic locations, because all GIS reference. But that you can dig up that Montana State report or research paper and see that anything less than 20, particularly in a quarter section, if I came in and did that and repeated that 10 times at 20, I'd still only be likely to be, if I can remember right, something like 80 to 85% confident of any number.
That's good information. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thank you.
So next question from Cameron. Would it be useful to test compost with this soil test?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then hopefully whatever goes into the how much compost goes into the soil and what it's going to do at that point. Hopefully it carries over well, but it's always good to know a general idea where everything sits at.
Okay, well, that's very interesting.
You'd be surprised how much just bare like compost or just homemade like stock solutions that farmers send.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I can show you a jar that's here. Doesn't look that good, but it smells pretty good.
So that compost test, you're really just measuring more nutrients still, right? You're not getting a look at biology, but it's sort of part of it.
I'll do it just to see, but
yeah,
it's good to see just overall nutrients, what's in there for sure.
Okay, good. Here's a kind of comment from Blaine. From the work we did on total nutrient extraction, there was no shortages. So yeah, what Blaine's talking about there is the General Mills project that Blaine and I are working on, and we looked at the total pool of mineral down to about a foot available and unavailable. So basically like the bank account of the soil, the total pool of mineral, kind of like knowing how much money you have in the bank. And it was interesting because over all those farms, about 50 farms, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, North Dakota, we did not see a single zero. So in other words, there are no nutrient deficiencies. There may be a nutrient availability issue could be a number of reasons, but it's interesting to know that we really have no real zeros in our soils.
Just must be excess amounts then.
Excess. Well, I don't know what
Sometimes.
is
But
what
okay,
is.
I'm going to talk here for a minute, Michael.
Go ahead.
So just knowing what we learned on those 50 samples, there was nothing zero. In fact, there was lots of every single one. And it's only one sample, granted, that I sent you last fall. You're showing shortages of on my farm of zinc, copper, and molybdenum, and that also showed in the sap test. And so I guess what I'm trying to get through my head is that from the total nutrient extraction, we're showing no shortages, but yet on the analysis we are. So the question then is why? And my hunch is it's biology, but is your testing showing what's biologically available? I guess is what I think your test is showing, not what's totally in that soil.
Well, be careful with the term total. Like the total is the oxidized form. And if it's the oxidized form, then there's the use of the strong acids in with everything.
Yeah, it's measuring everything. So
you
it's
have
basically,
to be careful with those terms. It's there's a huge difference between the reduced form and the oxidized form. And oxidized is total. And if it's total, then it's the strong acids, like in the first slide. But if it's the Haney test, he's going to be mostly reduced. So if you're comparing between
the total is this is like a complete extraction using
total harsh acids.
Yeah, very, very.
That's why.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're changing the form of everything. That's why boron is another one. I've heard boron being consistently low. Farmers constantly go out and buy boron because tissue tests have come back, they're low in boron. And they get a sap test done in the summer and they're just fine. Sulfur is another one. Sulfur is when you use sulfuric acid to extract the nutrients, because it's not only just you're moving from a reduced form to an oxidized form. By adding sulfuric acid, which is extra sulfur, you're going to come back low. So boron and sulfur are the top two, but for the other micronutrients, there's a huge difference when you're going from reduced to oxidized or available to total. You have to be very careful with those terms.
That clears it up. That makes sense.
Yeah. So when you say reduced form, that's basically in a form that has hydrogens attached
reduced
to it.
Form is available.
Yeah.
Reduced is available. And that's why people love sap, because it's the available form. It's a blood test for plants. It's telling you exactly what's in there at that moment. That's why greenhouses love it so much. They can detect a deficiency before even any yield losses or that color change occurs in the leaf. Whereas in a tissue test, you can see you may have sufficient levels, and then a week or two later, a deficiency starts showing up and it's too late at that point to fix it. Right. And it's the same with the soil. You have to keep the chemistry the same. If you compare a soil test from an oxidized form with a strong acid and compare that to a tissue test with strong acids, they should correlate. Whereas if you correlate a sap and a reduced form of soil, they should somewhat correlate. It's a different form of chemistry.
Yep, absolutely.
And that reduced form is always going to give you the most available forms. And that reduced form is always the type of chemistry that I'll use.
Yeah, so your test is looking at plant available nutrient.
I
Yeah,
want to
exactly.
know exactly what that plant is going to see in the soil, what the root is going to see first from a soil test, and then if we have to correct things a little bit in the sap, but I want to know what's available to the plant through the sap.
And that's
Why would I measure a total bank account? And when I want to know exactly what I can spend today.
and that's
for
what
money.
that's what my test showed, Melissa, is that the sap and the soil test, they correlated exactly or close.
Mm-hmm.
But so
And it should.
The question then is, we know from the total nutrient extraction using the harsh acids that there's lots there. So how do I, as a farmer interested in saving inputs and maximizing more or getting more yield, how do I make those nutrients that are down there that are not available, how do I make them more available?
Well, first pull up the report. Every report is going to be different. So if whatever you need in there, let's figure that out first, and then make a custom, either a custom solution for you, or, well, that would have to be it. Just make a custom solution for you and for each farmer. And two, you have to be very careful, not for my end, not to categorize everybody and start treating every farmer somewhat the same. They're all different. If there happens to be some correlations from one farmer to the next, then great, but everybody should be treated differently.
Okay, very good. Maybe this is a good segue into a discussion of putting it all together. In other words, you're a prairie grain farmer, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta. How do you make workable, practical sap testing, soil testing, and especially the sap testing part, then putting something together as a foliar to address a potential issue that you see on the sap test?
Yeah, so first would be to get that benchmark of where the soil sits at. Let's see where the carbon number's at, your microbial respiration. I want to see first. There's just one example. Let's look at the top section first. Where is your nitrogen coming from? Where's your carbon number at? Your microbial respiration. Let's see where that's at first, and then we'll tie in like you can get, I know some people, I can hand off some numbers for a custom foliar applications. If that's how some farmers want to go, you can contact me after and I'll give you the name and numbers of people. But getting the benchmark first on the soil is going to determine where we can start, and then getting the sap test done you can just tweak little things from there afterwards. But definitely a benchmark is the soil, and then we can go from there. But again, I don't like just saying, well, here is just get the soil test, get the sap test down, and here is a standard foliar application you can use. I am hesitant to do that because each farmer is different too, and I think each should be dealt with on an individual basis. So obviously the first step is getting the soil, and then follow up with a sap, and then go from there. And like I say, you can contact me and I'll give you some names and numbers of people that can help you out for sure.
Thank you. Do you include a recommendation of any needed fertilizer based on crop and yield goals?
Yeah, well, it's pretty obvious from the report. If you want some explanations further of what to add, I can definitely help out. And that's important too, because then there could be some tie-ups somewhere that showing in either the soil or the sap. And you need to address excess amounts or tie-ups before you just apply a certain nutrient. But I can definitely help with that.
Okay. So this is a question about grass. So this would be probably a pasture situation. So if the grass is growing in the spring, 6-inch high, can you do a sap test and a soil test at the same time?
Mhm.
What do you think of that?
Yeah,
Good
better
idea?
yet, you can, with grass, you can actually just take the soil that's attached to the grass, and then that literally will tell me exactly what, because I'll just take the soil off from around the roots, and it's all included. So that's ideal.
So you're talking about that, the rhizosphere, the zone between the kind of the soil that's bound to the root because of the biological, the glues and all that's working through the, oh, so you want that nice biologically active soil on the root.
And then if you
Okay.
can collect even deeper from where those roots are going, just keep that in a separate bag. So that'll be my 2 different depths. So you can collect, let's say, the 0 to 6 with the grass and then the root systems attached. And then from the 6 to 12, let's say, of just the deeper ground, to, if you really would want to see the 6 or 12 to 24.
Okay, that's very interesting. It's sometimes hard. So you're saying you could, if there's some root, those fibrous roots from the grass, don't worry about it. Just put that all in the bag
Put
with
it
the
all
soil.
in there.
Okay, all right. That's good to know. Question from Braggy. How about testing compost extracts or teas?
Hi, Bricky. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Another question from Edgar. Please use the term conventional soil test as a prefix where applicable. Conventional soil test. Okay, so that would be, your conventional standard soil test that we've been using on the prairies for 50 years or so, I think is what he's referring to. Where does potash come into the equation? So potassium chloride as a fertilizer.
Like to apply it?
I guess. He doesn't say anything
That would
more.
be, well, potash is really good. If you use potash as, like, if your potassium is low, but there again, from the soil, and then if you wanted to wait for the sap too, from like the sap report, be careful with the potassium and look at where your calcium numbers are first, because those two will constantly compete with one another, the calcium and potassium. So potash would be really good for potassium, but let's look first at the calcium number to make sure that you'd be getting the full impacts of adding that.
Right. Any comment about, say, potash, potassium chloride versus, say, potassium sulfate?
John Adams is on the call. I'll let him jump in on this one. Or Hal?
Defer to me. Potassium chloride, you're getting a lot of chloride salts in that. Potassium sulfate is very low salt. It doesn't have no salt, but it's very low. So yeah, in a lot of our prairie soils, we have a lot of sodium. So potassium sulfate's definitely a preferred choice. It's more expensive, but it does have a quicker release curve than potassium chloride. So Hal, any questions?
There you go. I don't think he's on.
Right. That's fine. And our last question, unless there's more, any last questions, please type them into the chat. This is from Edgar. Does the plant care if the nitrogen is coming from the organic form or inorganic form?
Absolutely. Like the higher the organic, the healthier your nitrogen is going to be, and you'll start to see the humic levels come up, better availability of your nutrients. Like I said, the higher inputs of your nitrate into crops, you're going to see that inorganic number increase significantly, which is almost, to me, it's going to help in that moment. It's like a Band-Aid solution by adding nitrate. You're obviously going to see an impact of adding nitrate, but your organic nitrogen is going to hold a much higher value of nitrogen to that plant than in inorganic form. And that's why humic is so important too. It's that bonding between the humic and the fulvic is forming that strong complex, that an organic complex, which is much more, makes nutrients much more available, and it lasts longer than in inorganic form. So if you have an organic form of nitrogen that's higher, that is absolutely ideal, because then, and eventually on SAP, there will be comparisons of proteins and amino acids as well. And I suspect with a higher organic nitrogen number, you're going to see higher levels of the proteins and amino acids. That work is actually currently being done now, and it'll be exciting when that comes out, but there'll definitely be a correlation between, like I said, the organic nitrogen to the amino acids and proteins for sure. And then with lesser amounts, lesser carbon, lower microbial respiration, but yet with a higher inorganic form, I suspect you're going to start to see a lower amount of your amino acids and proteins come through.
I think there's probably a lot that can be said on that topic, but one of the things is there is an energetic cost in the plant to convert, say, nitrate into a protein form, right? Like when we talk about organic versus inorganic, all we're talking about is the nitrogen tied to a carbon versus the nitrogen not tied to a carbon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the difference. But there is a cost to that plant to take, say, nitrate out of the soil solution and convert that into a protein. And if you can save that energy cost, there's a potential, savings of energy that can be used for other things like growing yield, grain or grass, right?
Yeah. Obviously, the first goal is making those nutrients available and getting a good balance first in your soil for the availability. And then, like I said, from the SAP from last week, if I see a first SAP report and from the beginning of the season and targets are just hovering between the low and the coming into target, if you have a perfect line going through or down, they're just basically hovering between that low and just coming into target, that's perfect. That's a nicely balanced soil coming into the sap. That's ideal. Because then at that point, if let's say potassium or iron or anything starts to drop, you can add something and it's going to have an impact right away. But if you have, let's say, tie-ups of calcium or potassium, that's going to affect your sap. So you're going to start to see either any of your micro or macronutrients come out more or less. Then you're struggling then of bringing that balance together. But you're always striving for a balance. And that is going to come from more of the organic sources in your soil that's making the nutrients more available, which I would think that's going to bring more balance to everything. So
yeah, I think that's
obviously the organic form is always better.
Yeah, in natural systems, you rarely see a high level of nitrate.
Yeah.
Question from Darren. When applying humic acid products, what is the preferred placement? Seed row or nitrogen band or split in both?
In furrow with nitrogen. Absolutely.
Okay, why is that?
It's the best that I know of so far. Put it in furrow with nitrogen. And like I said, make sure you're not applying a humic acid product with a pH of 5 or less. It's a waste of money. Fulvic acid doesn't matter. Fulvic acid is much more soluble across a wide variety of pHs, but humic, you have to be careful. But if you can get a product that's higher than a 5.5, add it in furrow with nitrogen.
Right. Part of the reason for that is that the humic is the source of carbon. You have your source of nitrogen, so you're balancing your carbon to nitrogen ratio.
Mm-hmm. And like on this report, even at a 1.44 absorbance, that's, you're barely on a scale of a 0 to 6. You're barely there. It's always going to exist, but you want it to peak. The minute it peaks to about a 5 or a 6, that's when you're really going to start to see humic do something.
You recommend humics more for in the soil, kind of like humics for humus and fulvic for foliar? That's sort of the simple analogy I've heard.
So
Go ahead.
Well, the humic acid is what creates humus. It's
Right.
the mineralization process that gives you the humus. So be careful again with the terms of humic acid and humus. They're two different things. It's that mineralization process that breaks it down. So that mineralization process of breaking down the humic acid to the humus, that's where you want the pH greater than 5.5 or 6.
Soil pH.
And the humic acid product.
Okay. Good. Well, I see no more questions. I'll just hold on here for a second. If there's any last questions, we can take those. Otherwise, I'll say thank you to Melissa. It's been great.
Thank you. Please call me anytime.
Yep.
Or email me.
She has a nice website. You can just Google Future Analytics and you'll find her. And it's good to have a lab like this in Canada, so we appreciate that. Thank you very much for doing these 2 webinars with us, and they'll be posted on the Manitoba Grazing Club YouTube channel. And I'm going to try to get that up and going here shortly. And when I do, I'll send an email out to let everyone know, and they'll be there available for your review. So thank you very much, Melissa, and have a good day.
You're welcome. Thanks,
everyone.
Thank you.